Hey everyone, it's Virgil, and I am sitting here with Tiffany Cabán, candidate for District Attorney of Queens. As you all know, this is a New York-based podcast where we talk about New York issues only. So Tiffany, I've been following your campaign for a few months, and when I hear about a new candidate that sounds exciting and very, very left, what I'll do is I'll talk to people who might know them or be involved with their campaign or organizing around them. And, maybe we'll talk about their policies, talk about their issues, talk about their competence as a candidate. But the real question that I always come down to is, is this person the real deal? And I was going to start out by asking you if you are the real deal, but I think the events of the past few days have kind of shown that you might be the real deal. Last night you were endorsed by the New York Times.
Yes.
And my producer tells me that you were just endorsed by Elizabeth Warren, too.
And Bernie Sanders.
It's both wings of the Democratic Party.
It's been a good couple of days.
Yeah. So if you still want to answer the question, if you're the real deal, be my guest.
I think our campaign, our platform, this movement is the real deal.
So for our audience, who are you?
I am Tiffany Cabán. I am just a born and bred Queens resident. I grew up in South Richmond Hill, Queens. My parents grew up in the Woodside Housing Project, so NYCHA housing, and I'm a public defender. Like that is who I am. It's when I say, hey, I'm a queer woman, I am a Latina, I'm a public defender. Like that is so tied to my identity. But also at this point, I'm also a candidate running for district attorney, and in a moment in time where I get to truly and honestly say that it is a continuation of the work that I have always done because of the way that we are redefining the role of what a prosecutor is and does.
I'm really interested in your background as a public defender, and going back to it, you go to law school, and that's very, very expensive usually. And
oh yeah,
people, even if they go in there with these lofty ideals, will find themselves with six-figure debt and think, well, maybe I'll just do a little corporate law or a little bit of evil for a bit. Why did you go into being a public defender?
First of all, I went to law school. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. There's no other kind of law that piqued my interest, that moved me. And, again, what brought me to the work was just the way that I grew up in a lower income community, working class family, and being in communities that were over-policed, over-criminalized, resource-starved. And it's actually interesting because when you go, first of all, the debt is real. Right now.
Oh, I don't even have a law degree, and I know.
Right now, I am on an unpaid leave of absence from work, and don't have health insurance, and I'm struggling to continue to make my student loan payments. But what's really interesting is that when you go into law school saying that you want to be a public defender, everybody tries to convince you that actually no, what you want to do is be the prosecutor because that's where all the power lies.
Yeah.
But it's kind of it's not true. It's kind of bullshit in some ways. What I love about being a public defender is if I'm working on a case, it's my case, right? Mm-hmm. I could go to my colleagues, I could go to my supervisor, I could go all the way up to the executive director and say, hey, I would love the benefit of your experience, your knowledge. And at the end of that conversation, it's always the same. It's like, but Tiffany, you know your case best, and so I'm going to support you in what you do and help you navigate that. And it's kind of the opposite when you get to the DA's office. Like the district attorney has a ton of power, no doubt about it. But the line district attorneys are really handcuffed in a lot of ways and have to get a supervisor to sign off on the smallest decisions. So you have the person with the most amount of information on a case being able to make the least amount of impact in terms of decision making.
I find that public defenders are some of the most fascinating people to follow online when they talk about their jobs in granular detail, because it is equal parts eye-opening and infuriating. And I do think there is value to demystifying the whole legal process to your average person, which, has a vision of it from TV procedurals and Law and Order and stuff like that.
Which is terrible. They make the public defenders look horrible.
I'm sure, yeah.
They're like, you're sitting and with the detective and the client's right next to you, they give the confession, and then finally your defense attorney is like, no, where's this stops now? It's that never happens.
I don't know if there is a procedural about a public defender or portraying them as heroic for getting their clients off. So tell me this, what is an average day as a public defender in New York City?
Oh, gosh. Well, when I first started 7 years ago, our caseloads were higher. So at any given time, I had over 100 cases in my caseload. But more recently, because of case caps that have passed, anywhere from 60 to 80 clients in court literally every day. Like you cherish those office days.
Yeah.
So the hours are long. So maybe you have an office day 2-3 times a month, but you're in court every day, running from courtroom to courtroom, getting your steps in, doing all kinds of different things on cases, maybe dispositions, maybe, different hearings, maybe you're getting sent out to trial, which is also, you never know when that's going to happen. It's like this roller coaster of adrenaline and emotions. And then you're doing things like dealing with clients and managing relationships with their families, going out to Rikers Island or other detention centers. We investigate our own cases too. We go out into the field and we talk to witnesses, and it is an incredibly dynamic job to do, but it's also incredibly emotionally draining, and it's good work, but it's hard work.
You're overworked and overpaid as a public defender.
Overworked and underpaid.
Underpaid.
For sure.
Sorry, I screwed that up.
Yeah, let's
Shit, okay.
don't mess that one up.
And it just seems to me that we have this principle of equality under the law, that everyone is entitled to competent legal representation. But it's obvious to everyone that if you're a wealthy defendant with a private attorney, you are at minimum matched with the DA's office.
Yeah.
And if you're indigent and you have an overworked, underpaid public defender, you're fighting with a hand tied behind your back. And chances are you're also, you can't pay $1,000 bail, and you have to fight while you're incarcerated.
And what's really the worst thing about it is that public defenders are some of the most talented, dedicated attorneys you could ever come across. I mean, there are so many private attorneys out there that really do their clients a disservice, and you couldn't do any better than your public defender. But then at the same time, you're taking some of the best attorneys that we have and just stacking the deck against them by, again, overworking them, having too many cases, withholding evidence. It's tough.
How do you achieve, as DA, a fair playing field, more equality and representation?
Yeah. Well, one thing is to shift the focus in terms of what we're prosecuting, right? If we are prosecuting less in some areas, it's going to have an effect on the caseloads of public defenders. So when we talk about decriminalizing poverty, mental health issues, substance use disorder, and getting a lot of the cases, because we punt public health issues to our justice system, right? Like Rikers Island, largest mental health provider in our city. But if you get some of those cases out of the system and then you start prosecuting, bad actors that are really destabilizing entire communities, which also helps with reducing low-level and nonviolent and also violent crime, those folks are not going to have public defenders. So I talk about the fact that as a public defender, I represent folks that are prosecuted for their substance use disorder rather than prosecuting doctors who overprescribe opioids, prosecuted for their homelessness rather than prosecuting bad landlords who unlawfully evict, predatory lenders who steal homes, employers who steal wages. Well, those folks, they're not going to be eligible for public defenders, right? But they are certainly worthy of the attention and the resources of our district attorneys, and really, again, getting the most, most out of your resources in terms of public safety and public health outcomes.
So you want to pull up the root, basically.
Absolutely. We need to get to root causes of crime, and in so many ways, stability equals public safety. And then also recognizing that, this is not about good people and bad people and just locking up the bad people. It's just about people, and we should be investing on the front end and giving people the opportunities to heal, to break unhealthy, dynamics and patterns, and have access to, the things that they need, not to just survive, but thrive. I often say that coming from the communities that I do, serving the communities that I have, too often when we ask for help, when we need help, we don't get anything, and then the government sends cops. Whereas in other areas, you get access to all kinds of stabilizing resources and supports, and that makes all the difference in the world.
So there's no contradiction for you wanting to go from public defender to the other side of the equation as prosecutor. This is a continuation.
Absolutely, because we're talking, and we're seeing it around the country, we're seeing defense attorneys getting elected into these roles, recognizing that our justice system should not be one where the goal is to punish for the sake of punishing. Certainly what we have done is incarcerated our black and brown, our low income, our immigrant communities, and saying, well, actually the goal is just to reduce recidivism. The goal is to keep people rooted in their communities with access to services and supports. The goal is to apply the law fairly across racial and class lines. Those are the things that public defenders fight to do every single day.
Speaking of one such DA, you were endorsed by Larry Krasner in
Yes.
Philadelphia.
Yes.
Who has, I think, worked to expand the window of what's possible of how you can reform a department. But, he's still faced a lot of pushback. He still has had to struggle to enact, decent reforms, opposition from the police, from his own prosecutors. Day one, what would you do to reform this system, which has gone in the total opposite direction for decades?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that I'll point out is that, DA Larry Krasner was the trailblazer, right? Like one of the first. And so his challenges were pretty unique, and those challenges continued to be present. But we're also at this point in sort of like this third cycle of these progressive decarceral prosecutors. I'm also really proud to be endorsed by Suffolk County DA out in Boston, Rachel Rollins. She's doing incredible work. You look at what Wesley Bellow's doing in St. Louis, and then you see, the folks that just won in Virginia. You see Chesa Boudin running in San Francisco, and there is power in this coalition building. There are more of us now. And with that, it sort of paves the way and makes it a little bit easier. But at the same time, what we're doing too, and what I feel like we've done in this race is we've pulled the community in, so that this is really, more than anything else, a mandate from our community saying that these are the changes that we demand. And so it's not just me coming into the office pushing back against folks that maybe are resistant to change, but the community is coming alongside and saying, no, we're fighting for these changes and we demand them. So on day one, it is about changing culture. It is about changing metrics of success. And then also, let's be real, right? Let's be practical in the sense that it's not going to be, we're going to fire everybody on day one.
Of course.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to institute this kind of change. You need a system that works. And so being very clear about what the policies are, what is expected of folks, bringing in support to add to additional training and saying, if you are with us, we're going to help you get to where you need to be so that we have some credible buy-ins. And then also we're bringing in folks, to fill in spaces where values align and can really help with that culture shift.
So you have a collective theory of power, collective theory of change in doing this. So how does that look in the community?
Yeah.
How does that engagement work?
I'm going to even take it a step further and saying that part of this is about divesting power from the office and investing power in our communities, because, bringing in our communities, again, when we talk about public safety and public health outcomes, you get the best returns. When you engage communities in community-driven solutions, crime goes down in ways that, our police departments don't accomplish, in ways that our DA's offices don't. You take Cure Violence, for example. When you go into communities that are struggling with gun violence, you go in, you say, hey, how can we help you deal with this? How can we help you get credible messengers in place? And gun violence goes down by upwards of 30 to 40%, again, in ways that the police don't accomplish. And sometimes, police come in and they up the ante and increase the risk of violence. It's again about bringing in communities and allowing them to do the things that they do best.
That's interesting that you say that, reducing the power of the DA's office, because, God, the power of an individual DA it's like a medieval duke, right? Just this immense ability to decide who gets charged and for what. And as much as they try to say that they're, we're neutral, I'm just like an umpire here. A lot of that is just politically driven, isn't it?
Oh, I mean, and certainly yes. And I love that you make the umpire analogy, because I actually make one all the time when we talk about what prosecutors are doing in terms of the power that they're wielding. So if I could give it to you,
of course,
because I'm a big baseball fan.
Oh, okay.
When we talk about the power, it's not just about the what are you going to charge, what sentences are you going to ask for, and all those kinds of things. But one of the big things in our DA's offices that DAs self-police on is our Brady rule. Right, and that's not covered by our discovery statute or evidence laws. It is something that says, hey, if you have this information that could, in any possibility, be used by the defense, you have to turn it over. And it's been really manipulated and torn to shreds. And it's information that the defense doesn't have any reason to know about. So again, they're really self-policing, and they treat it. I say there are three kinds of umpires in baseball. There's one that says, there are balls and there are strikes, and I call them like they are. There are balls and there are strikes, and I call them like I see them. And then there's the umpire that says they're balls and they're strikes and they're nothing until I call them. And that's what our DAs are doing, right? And making those kinds of determinations. And those are those gamesmanship type practices. These are the things that we need to be moving away from.
From the beginning of your campaign, you took a bold position on the decriminalization of drugs, decriminalization of sex work. What led you to those two positions?
It's the same thing that has led me to every position that we have taken. Talking to the communities that are most directly impacted and saying, well, what is going to stabilize lives? What's going to save lives? If it's going to save lives, it's worth doing. When we decriminalize substance use, you are creating an environment where, and embracing harm reduction, right? Whether it's safe injection sites, whether it's all kinds of other things, you decrease overdose deaths by over 30%. It saves lives. It's worth doing. And then, when we talk about sex work, understanding that this is an economic issue, it is a human rights issue, this is survival work for lots of folks, understanding that the most marginalized in our communities are often doing this kind of work, whether it's our trans Latina communities, whether it's our migrant workers, and just kind of reckoning with the fact that they have experienced extreme discrimination in areas of housing, of healthcare, access to job opportunities. This is how they put food on their table. And also, it's the best way to combat true trafficking, because then you're bringing it out of the shadows, right? You're making it so that sex workers can go and get help when they need it.
And there was the death a couple of years back during a police raid in Queens.
Song. Yeah. Yes. I'm very, very proud to be supported by Red Canary Song, an organization that fights for the rights of migrant workers and massage parlor workers. And that's a perfect example of why we must decriminalize and that half measures do not work. Because that's what gets incentivized when you say, I'm not going to prosecute sex workers, but I'm going to prosecute customers. You incentivize the over-policing and the harassment of sex workers.
Do you think that these actions from the DA would have an effect on the policing? Because there's a saying that's like, you can beat the rat, but you can't avoid the ride.
So I mean...
Is that it? Is that how it goes?
So one thing is that certainly... at the very least, we get to stop harm earlier in the process, as early as we can. So, certainly the police can make an arrest and bring a case, but we can say, hey, we're not prosecuting it. But what we're seeing, though, around the country is that the DAs, when they keep the data, when they share what their charging priorities are, it has had an effect in the kinds of arrests that get made. So there's an opportunity to communicate. These are the arrests that we really support, that we want you to bring to us, and you see less arrests in some of those other areas.
So, going to kind of a big picture question, when I think about the problems that indigent defendants face, getting this there in the criminal justice system, that's only one part of that. There's lack of housing, lack of healthcare, lack of employment. Mm-hmm. Do you have a holistic view of what should be done, a socialist view even?
So this is, again, about doing everything we can to stabilize lives, right? So when people know where they're going to lay their head down at night, when they have access to healthcare, job, and education opportunities, it's the best way to keep our community safe. And we should be investing more resources, more of our budget into stabilizing services, into investing in community-based organizations that are already doing the work but are starved for resources. And then also in Queens, in particular, the DA's office here is sitting on $100 million worth of federal asset forfeiture money. That's money that was stolen from our communities in a big bank fraud. And my commitment is to put it right back into our communities. But not to say that I get to decide, but in a form of participatory budgeting so that our communities can come to the table and kind of point out where they need the most support to get the best outcomes.
When you started this campaign, you were not a name by any means in big city politics.
No,
or
I was
anything.
not.
And you're up against these better known opponents. But now going into election day, you've received all these endorsements, a lot of volunteers, a lot of money and things like that. And you look pretty formidable. I mean, it's still up in the air, but you're definitely a challenger here. You're definitely a contestant. What would you say to people in other parts of this country who also see this pressing, urgent need for criminal justice reform and want to use the electoral process to change that and think, I can't do it. I'm just a public defender.
I will say, one, you can do it, and there is so much support out there that is ready to help you get there. I mean, again, as a 31-year-old queer Latina from a working class family, a career public defender. I never in a million years thought that this was where we would be. In fact, even when I decided to run in this race, which, 4 women sitting at a table saying, we're gonna do this, we're gonna try to change the system, it was more about changing the conversation, pushing people left, centering the experiences of my clients, our communities, and it's obviously built from that, but that was the win for us. And now we're like, no, we are going to win this. We have changed the conversation, we've shaped it, and this, these races are so incredibly important, and it's definitely doable. And when you do it in a manner that one is uncompromising, and you do it from your heart, and you really believe in what you're doing, and most importantly, that you do it in a manner that brings the community in, that centers their experiences, that amplifies their voices and concerns. That's a path to success, I think. And so I encourage more people to do this because we need it. We need it badly.
Any last remarks?
Well, we only have 6 days till the election, so my last remarks have to be, please, 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 in New York and beyond, before June 25th, check out our website on CabánForQueens.com. Sign up to Door Knock, to Phone Bank, to Text Bank, because that is how we win this. So thank you. I appreciate y'all. The link is, bit.ly/Cabán, CABANGOTV.
Tiffany Cabán, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Joining us.
Thank you.
Joining us.